This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. After experiencing trauma, I went to therapy, and my therapist guided me through a difficult time in my life. They helped me understand what was happening and provided me with tools to cope and find my own strength and resilience. Their experience and compassion were invaluable and enabled me to rebuild my life and move forward. I strongly believe in the power of therapy to help people through difficult times. BetterHelp connects you with a licensed therapist who is trained to listen and give you helpful, unbiased advice. First, you go to their site. You can use my link, betterhelp.com/resilience. You answer a few questions, and BetterHelp will match you to a professional who has years of experience helping people with struggles just like yours. Let BetterHelp connect you to a therapist who can support you, all from the comfort of your own home. Visit betterhelp.com/resilience or choose podcast, then Notes on Resilience during sign up and enjoy a special discount on your first month. Hello, welcome to Notes on Resilience. I'm your host, Manya Chilinsky, and my guest today is Garth Smelser from Mindful NOAA and Mindful Fed. We talk about mindfulness, resiliency in the workplace, and the power of community. This was an amazing conversation about some really great work Garth is doing. I hope you enjoy the episode. Hello, Garth. I'm so glad you're here today.
Hi, Manya. Thank you so much for having me. It's just an honor to be here.
Yes. Well, the first question before we learn a little bit more about you and who you are and what you do is, I would like to know if you could have any superpower, what would that be?
I appreciate the question, and having heard some of your previous episodes, I wondered if this was coming. And I thought a lot about it because once a comic book fan, I don't go towards the teleportation or the flying, which a younger me might pick. And this is not meant to be too esoteric or woo-woo, but and this is really genuine, with this second half of my life discovery in meditation and mindfulness, my desired superpower would to be able to turn on connection with people and the environment and life. I think that's such an embedded part of mindfulness practice, is to sort of let go of the self and realize how interconnected you are. Yeah. And just to be able to tap into that instantaneously, even without meditation, would be a really wonderful superpower.
Wow. I love that. And when you figure out how to make that happen, please give me a call. I would also like one.
Yeah, I would bottle that up, and I would never meditate again. But
yes.
For now, we have meditation.
Yes, absolutely. Awesome. So thank you for sharing. I love that one. I've not heard anything even like remotely like that before. So thank you.
But teleportation would be fun too.
Yes, right. I think you can't beat that. So now I'd love for you to just tell us who you are and what you do, and how is it that you're in a place to be thinking about resilience and compassion and maybe trauma?
I love it. Thank you so much. Yeah. And I repeatedly need to pinch myself for having landed in this position in the federal government, in this innovative space of workplace resilience. So I'm the Mindful NOAA program manager, and I have been for the past year and a half. So I work for NOAA Fisheries for the past 5 years. But when the pandemic hit, this organic by employees for employees movement happened that I helped co-found, where we just started some very small meditations, and over 2 years it grew to the point where they needed a full-time manager. And we're still in this pilot stage, but being endorsed and resourced to actually have a first of its kind mindfulness community of practice in the federal government. So in addition to that, I've also been founding Mindful Fed, which is an interagency effort for the same. And so again, just pinching myself to have land in this space of workplace and individual resilience. Prior to that, I was with the Forest Service for 14 years. And then prior to my Forest Service career, I was in the U.S. Navy as a naval officer for 8.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's an interesting journey. I imagine as a naval officer, maybe this isn't the direction you thought your career would be going.
Yeah, you're spot on, not even remotely. And I realized that I having hit 50, I now know what I want to be when I grow up. And this is truly feels like a noble calling to be a mindfulness and meditation teacher and to help others discover that path.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, as a naval officer, as a Forest Service employee, I was always trying to figure out what that next opportunity was. And so it was after the discovery of meditation that came to light. So but all those different paths led to me being right here, which I'm very grateful for.
Right. I'm curious, how did you discover meditation?
Yeah, so nothing hugely dramatic or traumatic that
Mhm.
leads a lot of people to mindfulness and meditation. But I got to a point as I was chasing jobs and locations and salaries and stature that I wasn't really enjoying how I was showing up for myself and my family and my job. And
Mm.
it wasn't necessarily anything on the surface that people would see, but I just felt like something was amiss.
Yeah.
And slowly dealing with increasing anxiety, I needed to find a path that allowed me to be my best self. And so I started from the spiritual perspective of exploring mindfulness meditation and very, very quickly realized that it was really hard and it's
Yeah.
exactly what I needed.
Hmm.
And so this was back in around 2015, still in the Forest Service. And very quickly realized that it was so transformational for me that I wanted to give back to it. And so that's when I pursued training as being a mindfulness teacher in grade school classes. And then when the pandemic hit, getting training through the Engaged Mindfulness Institute to help launch Mindful NOAA. So yeah, it feels good to finally know what you want to do when you grow up.
It does, doesn't it? I'm glad you've come to that place. Before I get into some more of my questions, I'm just really curious. Can you tell us a little bit more about Mindful NOAA and Mindful Fed? What do they look like?
Absolutely. We were sort of building the bicycle as we rode it. So because folks were just struggling with that new reality of the pandemic and being isolated and working from home, I had experienced what was going on in my old agency, the Forest Service, and realizing that they were incorporating mindfulness into meetings and into training. And I said, if there, why not in NOAA? And so,
Hmm.
like I mentioned, we just said, well, let's start holding a meditation with a few of us, and that word spread rather quickly. And I think in that spreading, leaders were willing to throw that door open because they were looking for solutions about employee wellness and resilience. And so it grew rather quickly because facilitators came out of the woodwork wanting to help, and we were able to hold daily sessions, if not multiple sessions per day, in both
Wow.
meditation and movement. And so we have now like a cohort of about a dozen facilitators that are credentialed to lead these sessions. And our model is we gather for a half hour or so where we convene as community. We're not rushing into this, but we practice for about 10 minutes and then we share about that practice. And one of the greatest feedback and testimonials we receive, Manya, is around the safe space that we hold. It's not
Hmm.
even so much about that the meditating is happening or that people are getting a so-called break from the day. It's that they have this place to gather and realize that they're struggling with this thing called the human condition, just like everybody else is, and they're not feeling alone in these challenging times in this era of burnout and quiet quitting and so forth.
Right.
And so from there, other folks started hearing about it. I was connected with the Federal Executive Institute, where I started teaching as adjunct faculty with senior executives there. And I quickly realized that this shouldn't stop at one agency. And so I started convening conversations with other change advocates. And over a year of conversation, we finally launched it this January and hold weekly Mindful Fed sessions where any and all are welcome to attend. And that's still in its infancy too, because we don't have any official agency sponsoring us, and we're really building it organically from the ground up.
Oh, wow. That sounds amazing. And I would have loved something like this when I was working in the corporate world.
Yes, we hear that a lot. We hear like, how did you do that? Why can't we have that in our organization? Yeah.
Exactly. And I really love what you said about that you're just holding the safe space for people among all of the other benefits, that it's just a place where people can feel safe.
Yes, it's very powerful. And that's a huge reason why it's so invigorating and fulfilling as a mindfulness facilitator, because you're seeing the change happen in the moment, not just with the myriad benefits that the science and research shows around meditation, but it's the convening together. And I think be it Mindful NOAA or more broadly Mindful Fed, that affinity of public service and gathering with other people who kind of know what your workplace culture is like, they may share the same mission. It's very different than getting on an app or, a YouTube video around, because anybody can do that in a solitary way, but a
Yes.
powerful practice in mindfulness is doing it with others in community.
Yes, absolutely. Wow, that is wonderful work that you're doing.
Thanks.
Thank you for doing that. So, the name of the podcast is Notes on Resilience. What do you think about the word resilience?
We chat about this a lot. We were recently setting up a staff engagement with a large part of NOAA that's undergoing this transition around finance and acquisition and how they track it. And so this big, huge change, and resilience comes up. And some people look at resilience as the need to be bulletproof, and they sort of resist that. And Mindful NOAA, Mindful Fed approaches it very, very differently, is that we are practicing skills, cultivating skills that allow you to reframe your relationship with stress. We're not getting rid of these stressors. We're not changing the culture of the organization around workload, but we want to help people realize what they are experiencing and being fully with it. And from that, the resilience unfolds, right? We're not tamping down the stressors, we're actually reframing the relationship with it. And so that ability to sort of bounce back from adversity happens in, I think, a little bit of a counterintuitive way about just, I need to pull myself up by my bootstraps and walk it off type of mindset that I used to have as well. And that resilience can happen again through this community and through practice. And it's not this willpower that we feel like we need to have, that we just need to buckle down and get through it. And so it's a rich, robust conversation around resilience, that because it does get thrown around quite a bit, and it can be off-putting for folks that are struggling. And again, coming back to the community, is we struggle with it together, which creates an inherent resilience just by convening, by coming together.
Right. And I'm really glad to hear you say that resilience isn't about willpower. And I know I've read some studies recently that talk about, we have a very limited amount of willpower, and we don't want to be setting things up that's what we're relying on to build our habits, etc. And I do think people think that resilience is willpower, or resilience means being bulletproof. So it's good to hear your thinking about it.
Yeah, I think I've heard, seen some of the same studies you're probably pointing at. And it kind of put me back on my heels a little bit, because, I might have framed a previous superpower as my willpower, my ability to be steadfast with things. And to your point, the research is showing, maybe not so much. There's a sense of hard work, but there's also opportunity and things being aligned. And that if we depend on our willpower, we're sort of setting ourselves up for failed expectations. And mindfulness practice specifically invites you to set an intention around your practice rather than an expectation. And I think there's a linkage there with expectation and willpower. If I just had the willpower, I would have sat on my cushion and meditated today. But if you approach it with a sense of kindness and self-compassion to yourself, you show up more with intention rather than this checking off the list of things to do in that day, which gives, points at whether I have the willpower or not to do it.
Yes. I do actually use a meditation app, and I got myself into I think it's 968-day streak of meditating every single day.
Oh my gosh, congratulations.
Thank you. And it was amazing. But you know what? On the very next day, I literally just forgot to meditate.
Oh, that's isn't that perfect? I mean, doesn't that just prove that point, right?
Exactly. And somebody asked me if I was upset about it. And I said, well, no, because the streak for the sake of the streak wasn't the point.
Right. Yeah, and that's the delicate dance. And I sort of have a love-hate relationship with the technology that brings so much into our lives, but also can be so distracting. So I also have an app that I've been using recently because I want to know what's out there. And that sort of sense of not just commodification, but also that gamesmanship of how many good nights of sleep can I get in a row? How many good days of dieting, how many days can I meditate? There's pros and cons there. And I don't want to scare people away from that, but just be gentle with the idea that this is something that you have to do. As soon as it becomes a thing that's heavy, and that you hang your head when you don't get it done. I mean, it's better not to do it, because mindfulness is a way of practicing being in the world and not doing things. And if we chalk it up to one more thing I have to do, then we've layered on additional judgment, right? And
Yes.
if not, mindfulness is anything, it's self-compassion.
Yes. Yes. Thank you for that.
But I'm still excited for your streak.
I know. I was too. I was too. And I was actually, honestly, equally excited at the way that it ended, because I just was done and I didn't worry about it.
And you were okay with it. Yeah, good.
Yeah. I felt like after 900 plus days of meditating, I hope I've got the, equanimity or the calmness to recognize that it's okay that I didn't meditate one day.
Well, I love that as a model for folks who might be, have their interest piqued or curious or maybe even skeptical about it, is that it takes that type of regular practice for that realization to open up, and that result of being okay with whatever and letting go of expectations. That's so important, because new practitioners are often like, I'm just not getting this right. I can't do it. My mind is wandering. And there truly is this sense of pass or fail, which
Yes.
can be detrimental to any new practice.
Yes. I do think we very much in that pass fail, I have to succeed. Like you mentioned gamification. So it's, and there are some benefits to that, but I think there are some downsides as well. So you are working within the federal government to be working on this mindfulness program, and you're helping people build resiliency. And I'm not sure people would associate the federal government with something like this.
You're exactly right. Yep.
And I'm curious, from where you sit, what do you think is the role of our systems or our institutions in supporting people's resiliency?
Oh gosh, I love that question. And it seems to be, at least in the circles I'm in right now and some colleagues I have, it seems to be presenting itself, that very question. My experience with workplace wellness and individual wellness, for the past 30 years, has always been on the individual. Like, take care of yourself so you can be more productive. And it was very focused on the individual dealing with their stressors, both work and home, and their responsibility. I think lip service to wellness, and maybe even policies supporting it, where you could, in some agencies, but not all, could work out on government time, or maybe get a gym membership subsidized. But I think with the pandemic and this era of quiet quitting and burnout, I've understand there's more research pointing that it's the system that's creating the stressors with regards to too heavy a workload, or unrealistic expectations, or maybe less positive leadership. Therefore, it's the system that should be integrating wellness into the workplace, and not always pointing to the individual, even with best of intentions, but pointing at the individual. Hey, Garth, go take care of yourself. And rather saying, actually, how can we show up with you to take care of yourself? And I think that's another variable in the Mindful NOAA, Mindful Fed equation that unfolded over these past couple of years, that people felt seen and valued. That, wait a minute, I can come meditate with you on government time. That's okay. And the answer is yes, because we know the other 7.5 hours of your day are going to be that much more productive because of the time that you took.
Right. Right.
If the system's not going to take responsibility and accountability for it, why would we expect any different outcomes? Why would we expect quiet quitting to slow down, or the folks moving on in between agencies? Of course, we're going to get the same results.
Right. Right. I started my understanding of resiliency from the personal perspective. After what happened to me, I started to realize, okay, what is resiliency? What does it mean for me, etc. And as I was going through that journey, I did come to the place of, well, no matter how resilient I might personally be, if the system, and I'm putting that in quotes, is still pushing me down, or not being supportive, or saying, no, that doesn't matter, or, not providing the sick leave that I need, etc., whatever it looks like, then it doesn't matter how personally resilient I am if things keep knocking me down.
Yes, absolutely. And so it has to be the individual in concert with the system. And that's where mindfulness can approach it in such an accessible, like truly universally accessible way, that everybody has access to it anytime, anywhere, especially in this hybrid world. And so mindfulness practices can serve as both the responsive or therapeutic reaction to stress
Mhm.
imposed by the system, but also the preventative, right? If the system can endorse and resource things like mindfulness in the workplace, integrating it into the way they deliver their mission,
Right.
then we're allowing the system to be resilient and not depending on the individual, right? So if you have toxic leadership still or way too crazy heavy workloads, then of course people, even with their personal resilience, are still going to find they're going to move on, right? They're going to find that system, that employer, that leader that allows them to thrive. So it's a dance, because it's not like a mindfulness community of practice can change the system from the get-go, right? We're helping the individuals, like I said, reframe their relationship with stress and therefore the resilience. But hopefully from that will be the upstream changes that will happen in future leaders that help change the system.
Right, right. And do you feel these mindfulness programs that you have? I think a lot about what I call trauma sensitive
Mm-hmm.
workplaces.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see a connection between this mindfulness work that you're doing and building workplaces that are really accepting of us as messy human beings with things that have happened to us?
Yes. Oh gosh, yeah, I love that term, messy human beings, because aren't we all? And first, in that safe space, we're breaking down the idea that there is a not messy human being, right? And
Mm.
that's just the human condition, and we're all struggling with it, and then hopefully thriving in it. But to your point about trauma informed practices and communities of practice, early on, we knew that we wanted our facilitators to be credentialed in trauma informed mindfulness. And so all our programs support that. And it doesn't mean that we're therapists or psychologists, but we do take training that is trauma informed to use the types of convening practices, the language, that building that sense of belonging that helps people show up when they do have those experiences. So that's really, really important for us to be credentialed in that. The next step is having the conversations about that, to be able to destigmatize those experiences and the messy paths that people have back from traumas. I imagine in your own experience in your show that you've explored all the research around how trauma settles into the body. We
Mhm.
recently did a Veterans Advisory Council panel where we had experts come and talk about that, like the author of Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote The Body Keeps the Score, was
Oh,
on that
yes.
panel. It's just
Yes.
just wonderful researcher, and how, and it feels very. I think a lot of us think, again, it's just like, oh, I just brush off the trauma and it's my willpower that will get it through. It's like, no, that's not what the research shows. Is that it settles in to your cells, it settles into your body, and it takes deliberate practice and community to work through that trauma. And again, I don't mean to pose that as any type of expert or any type of therapist, but the power of community and what the research is showing with outcomes of mindfulness practice is pretty compelling. And I think that's what leadership is noticing
Mhm.
and willing to invest in.
That's so great to hear that leadership is noticing it and willing to invest, because that is where we're going to see the changes. Throughout your work, because of this work that you're doing and your personal experience, what is an important lesson about resilience or compassion that you feel like you've learned?
Mm-hmm. Wow, I could sit with that for a week. I guess it has to start with the self. Resilience more broadly, or our ability to be better servants of our family, of our relationships, of our work, of our community service. Like, I think pre-meditation me would have been just like, just go do it, right? That's just what's expected of you. And that was at the cost of like what was going on internally, and whether I had compassion for myself, which I
Mm.
think can be slowly eroding away to resilience. And so mindfulness practice, if anything, is a slow journey of self-learning, right? You're slowly growing more aware of what's going on in your experience with your sensations and your thoughts and your emotions. And from that practice, you become more self-aware, which means you become more self-compassionate. And from that, you realize like, oh, I'm dealing with this, others are dealing with it. So it allows you to be more compassionate with others. And so this sort of unfolding moves towards the ability to not become fatigued by empathy, not become
Mhm.
fatigued by your sense of service, right?
Mhm.
And so empathic fatigue is real, but compassion is that outlet to allow you to act upon your empathy in a life-giving and resilient way. So this all comes back to like, can I foster compassion for myself in my practice? And
Mm-hmm.
over time, start to see how that allows me to act more compassionately in the world, which has the amazing benefit, the research shows, of helping the individual be more resilient. So I think compassion and resilience are so intertwined.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Thank you for sharing that. Jumping from the personal back again to the sort of systemic or organizational, what do you think is the most important action or policy that an organization can take to be supportive of our resiliency?
Of course, every organization has its own sort of culture and personality that has been established over decades. And then on top of that, in the federal government, you have just the sheer bureaucracy, which serves a purpose, but can really make it hard to innovate into this type of space.
Mm-hmm.
I've only been public servant through federal government and my military service. I can't speak to the private sector, but what my understanding is, like, private sector is just more nimble in this space. And it took employees at the ground level to build Mindful NOAA and Mindful Fed, right? And we're still in this pivotal stage of getting leaders to notice it and say, let's make this so. Let's integrate this into our culture just as we would with material resources and training and how we hire. To do that, I think leaders need to move beyond the lip service of, like what I said before, is like, hey, individual employee, take care of yourself. They need to show up in those spaces, be present in those spaces more than a periodic webinar or a memo, but actually be in these communities of practice, demonstrating their own vulnerability in their own wellness journeys and what they're doing. I think that speaks volumes, and it moves sort of the implied subtlety of employee wellness to an explicit permission slip,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe even moving towards an expectation, right? If I want you to be your best self and be as most productive in the service of the mission, then I expect you to take care of yourself. And that will look differently for different organizations and different agency policies. But I think that leadership presence and moving beyond lip service is imperative.
Yes. I would love to work in a workplace like that.
And it takes resources, right? It takes, when it
Yes.
comes down to it, it takes more than just the messaging. It takes staff time. It takes the support and operational and administrative support to make these programs a reality. And my experience with Mindful NOAA and Mindful Fed is there's danger of burning out those that are trying to help build resilience in others, just like
Yes.
any service organization. So that's another thing for leaders to be aware of.
Yes. And from your perspective, it sounds like you started Mindful NOAA and people, employees were recognizing how important this was. And then you kind of said, all right, let's get some resources for this. But how does a company get the resources, or how do you prioritize resources for a program like this?
Yeah. And I do applaud NOAA leadership, I think, for truly innovating into this space. And, they saw the work that was happening at the ground level. They saw the community growth and the interest. And so it's important to do the surveys, get the data, analyze the data, and present the case for change to leaders. And it was in that presentation of case for change that leaders said, okay, well, we're going to pilot this program then. And yes, in limited resources, one priority is taken over the other. And I think with all the challenging things that happened in the pandemic, it also brought the epidemic of mental health to the forefront. And so leaders we're grateful to have this almost a gift wrap with a bow wellness program ready, right? It was like served up on a silver platter. And they said, of course, we're going to do this. And so even though all along I've always been bracing myself for doors to be closed in our face, it's been quite the opposite. Of leaders have said, wow, look what you're doing. How can we help? And so we're still, again, in a transition where they're piloting these things and using taxpayer dollars. We have to be smart about doing it in a really credible and authentic way.
Yes.
And when they see that, they're going to invest. Now, the enterprise approach across many agencies, across government, that's going to be a different type of challenge. And I'm still with partners, with colleagues in different agencies, trying to navigate that. Like, where could Mindful Fed land within a specific government agency? And is that even the right model to serve all 2 million plus federal employees? But what a wonderful vision, right? To think that our federal servants, our civil servants, are invested in that way for their own resilience, and really sort of revolutionizing how we see public servants, because I know that people look at government employees in sort of a sideways glance and the jokes about it. But we're in these tough spots of being pulled by political winds and different budgets and missions changing and workloads, just like a lot of places. And to be providing this, I think, is an invaluable service to the American people, right? Because we are trying to fulfill these missions for them. So I just hope leaders can see the value of that investment, of prioritizing the U.S. government's individual and organizational wellness in service of the missions, not just in service of the individual.
Yes. Yes. What a fabulous vision. And thank you for your work on that. I know how important it is, and I know there are many of our listeners who know how important that is. So as we're getting close to the end here, what's one question that you wish I had asked you, and how would you have answered it?
Manya, I think one question that gets, even though Western culture is adopting mindfulness and meditation more readily after these decades of research, both in the neuroscience and the medical research about its benefits, there's still sort of that cultural conditioning about it being exotic and different, and at the best, like, oh, that's just, I can't fit it in my schedule, I don't know how to do it. And so a question around how we encourage people who are looking for tools and practices to build the resilience that you've been talking about. And I would offer that you start with that self-compassion. You start small, right? You start with a mindful breath each day. You start with maybe a supportive app or a supportive community, be it Mindful NOAA, Mindful Fed, or some community in your local area. But I think often people who hear about it, they think, oh, that's not me. Mm-hmm. And they deny themselves even the possibility to experience it. And meditation often starts off for people very much in their head, very much of a cognitive journey, thinking about meditation. And until you experience it, you're sort of just scraping the surface. So I would say invite yourself to one mindful breath per day. Maybe move to 1 minute of meditation, and then maybe open up to an app or a community, but just give yourself the opportunity to experience it and see what happens. Because if there's anything, I ask people not to believe in meditation, but to experience it.
Oh, I like that. To experience meditation. And what is something that you would tell your 18-year-old self about resiliency or about compassion?
Oh, gosh.
And would he have heard it?
That's the better question. No, I don't. I don't think he would have heard it. And I don't want to beat myself up about that, right? Because like I said before, all those wonderful experiences, and including the challenges and the heartache that may have been tamped down, led me to this space where I'm not just helping myself, but I'm helping others. So that's okay that he wouldn't hear it. But I guess some advice would be to savor what's good in this moment. Pause, not to dampen the desire to achieve and do great things in life and be of service, but just pause and breathe and savor what you're doing. I think that 18-year-old was always about the next moment. And mindfulness practice is actually, your life is right here. It's right now. It's in this moment. And it can only ever be in this moment.
Yes. Oh, I like that. And I feel like, when I ask myself this question, what would I tell my 18-year-old self about resiliency? I also know that she wouldn't listen. It's a challenge. But anyway, so Garth, thank you so much. This has been a fabulous conversation. How can our listeners reach you?
Well, I appreciate it. I'm so grateful for you spotlighting this. So for now, you can reach me at my email, garth.smelser@noaa.gov. And I'd love to chat with you about this if you're a federal employee or not, but just exploring with you about how we integrate this into our workplace culture more broadly. And so that's the best way to contact me, is via email.
Oh, excellent. Thank you for that. And we will put that in the show notes for everyone. And Garth, thank you again. This was a wonderful conversation, and I love the work that you're doing.
I appreciate it. Again, this is a noble calling that I'm honored to be a part of, and I appreciate you with all your work on resilience, spotlighting it.
Oh, thank you. All right. Thanks to our listeners. We will see you next time. Thank you for listening. I hope you got as much out of this conversation as I did. So if you'd like to learn more about me, Manya Chilinsky, I work with organizations to help understand how to create environments where people can thrive after difficult life experiences. And I do this through talks and consulting. I'm a survivor of mass violence, and I use my experience to help leaders learn about resiliency, compassion, and trauma-sensitive leadership, to build strategies to enable teams to thrive and be engaged amidst difficulty and turmoil. If this is something you want to learn more about, visit my website, www.manyachilinski.com, or email me at manya@manyachilinski, or stop by my social media on LinkedIn and Twitter. Thanks so much.